She said it so casually. That was the part that stayed with me longest, not the words themselves, but the tone. Like she was telling me the dry cleaning was ready, like 4 years of my life amounted to nothing more than a scheduling inconvenience. "Dorothy," my daughter-in-law said, "we only have 4 tickets, and we want to give them to the people who were really there for Sophie." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. The coffee was still brewing. The morning light was coming through the window the same way it always did, falling across the yellow curtains I'd had for 30 years, and for a moment, everything looked completely normal. Everything looked exactly the same. "I see," I said. "I knew you'd understand. You always do." I set the phone down on the counter. I didn't say goodbye. I'm not sure she noticed. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand what those 4 years looked like from where I was standing. My son Nathan called me in September, 4 years ago. Sophie had been accepted to the University of Michigan. Full program, pre-med. She'd worked for it. I knew that. I'd watched her. I'd sat at her kitchen table helping her study for the MCAT prep exams she was already taking at 17. I'd driven her to the library on Saturday mornings when Brooke said she was too tired and Nathan was working doubles at the plant. Sophie and I had a rhythm together. We always did, even when she was small and used to fall asleep in my armchair watching old movies. She was too young to understand, but insisted on watching anyway because she said she liked my voice when I explained things. So when Nathan called and said the financial aid package had a gap, a significant gap, I didn't hesitate. "How much?" I asked. He told me. It was most of what I had set aside. Money from 31 years of teaching middle school English. Money from the life insurance after her grandfather passed. Money I had earmarked for things I'd told myself I would do someday, a trip to Italy maybe, a kitchen renovation. Small dreams you keep in a drawer and promise yourself you'll get to eventually. "I'll take care of it," I said. Nathan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. She's going to be a doctor. That's enough." And it was. I meant it completely. I transferred the first payment that same afternoon, and I stood at my kitchen window watching the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel across the yard, and I felt the uncomplicated satisfaction of a person who has done the right thing. No hesitation. No resentment. That was who I thought I was. Brooke called an hour later to thank me. She was warm that day, genuinely warm, I thought. She said things like, "We couldn't do this without you, and Sophie is so lucky to have you," and I believed every word because I wanted to believe them and because there was no reason yet not to. The first year was good. Sophie called me every Sunday. She told me about her professors, about her roommate from Atlanta who played guitar badly but with tremendous enthusiasm, about the cadaver lab that made her cry for a week, and then somehow made her certain she'd chosen the right path. I sent care packages. I sent books I thought she'd love. I drove up twice, once in October when she was homesick, once in February when she had her first real crisis of confidence and called me at 11 at night and said she didn't think she was smart enough. "You are," I told her, "but even if you weren't, you're stubborn enough, and in medicine that counts for more." She laughed. That was enough. Somewhere in the second year things started to shift, not dramatically. Just the small withdrawals that you don't notice until you go to make a deposit and the account is already empty. Brooke stopped calling. Nathan called less. Sophie still called on Sundays, but sometimes Brooke would be in the background making comments, things like, "Tell her we're busy this weekend," when I mentioned visiting, or "She doesn't need to send more stuff. Sophie has everything she needs." Never directly rude. Never anything you could point to. Just a slow and steady redirection. I told myself it was normal. Young families get busy. Life gets complicated. I kept sending the tuition checks. I kept being available when Sophie called. I stopped mentioning visits unless I was invited. By the third year, I had perfected the art of making myself small enough to fit wherever I was allowed. I drove 3 hours to Nathan's house for Thanksgiving and sat at the far end of the table and let Brooke's mother, a woman named Connie, who laughed too loudly at her own jokes, sit in the chair that had once been mine. I washed dishes without being asked. I drove home the same night, even though Nathan had said I could stay, because I felt, I don't know how else to describe it, like a guest in a house that used to feel like an extension of my own. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that what mattered was Sophie, the 4th year she was finishing her thesis, a research paper on early detection protocols for ovarian cancer. She sent me the first draft and asked me to read it, and I spent an entire weekend with a red pen going through it, the way I used to grade my students' papers carefully, with notes in the margins, with encouragement where I could find it, and honest corrections where I couldn't avoid them. I sent it back with a card that said I was proud of her in ways I didn't have words for yet. She called me crying, happy crying. She said, "Grandma, I'm going to dedicate this to you." "You'll do no such thing," I told her. "You'll dedicate it to the science. That's bigger than both of us." She laughed again. That particular laugh, startled and genuine, was one of my favorite sounds in the world. I had already started thinking about the graduation. I'd picked out a dress, navy blue, which Sophie always said looked good on me. I'd even booked a hotel room in Ann Arbor, 3 months in advance, because I knew it would fill up fast. I had it all in my mind like a little movie. Sitting in those bleachers in the June heat, watching my granddaughter walk across that stage and receive the diploma that 4 years and every dollar I had helped make possible. I wasn't asking to be thanked publicly. I wasn't asking for a speech or a mention. I just wanted to see it. I'd earned that much, at least. That was what I was thinking about when Brooke called on a Tuesday morning in April and told me there weren't enough tickets. 4 tickets. Nathan, Brooke's mother Connie, and Brooke's sister Vanessa, who had met Sophie exactly 3 times in 4 years, but apparently qualified as someone who was really there. I didn't argue. I have never been a woman who argues in the moment. I was raised to think first, and by the time I've thought it through, the moment for arguing has usually passed. So I said I see, and I set the phone down, and I stood in my kitchen in the morning light and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not sadness, clarity. I went and sat at the table. I made myself finish my coffee. I looked around the kitchen, the yellow curtains, the pot of herbs on the windowsill that Sophie had given me 2 Christmases ago, the photograph on the refrigerator of her at 16 in the front yard, squinting into the sun. And I thought, I have spent 4 years making myself small enough to fit through whatever door they left open. I have been grateful for scraps and called it grace. I have watched myself disappear one accommodation at a time, and somewhere in the process I convinced myself that was love. It wasn't. Love doesn't require you to vanish. I called my neighbor Carol that afternoon. Carol has known me for 22 years. She is the kind of person who listens without interrupting and tells you the truth without making it feel like a verdict. I told her everything. The phone call, the 4 tickets, the 4 years, all of it. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to the graduation," I said. "Dorothy, I'm going. I don't need their ticket. I'll find another way in. And before I do any of that, I'm going to make some phone calls." The first call I made was to the university's financial aid office. I explained that I had been the primary contributor to my granddaughter's tuition and that I had not received documentation confirming the account was fully cleared. I asked them to pause any disbursement of the education trust I had established for my 2 other grandchildren, Nathan's younger kids, 7 and 9, until I could review the terms. The woman on the phone was very efficient. She said it would be handled by end of business. The second call was to my financial advisor. I asked her to send a letter to Nathan and Brooke, explaining that the standing quarterly transfers I had been making to their household, which had started as help with the kids and had gradually become something closer to a supplement to their income, were being discontinued effective immediately. I asked her to make it professional and factual, and to send it by certified mail so there would be no ambiguity about whether it had been received. She paused. "Are you sure, Dorothy?" "Completely," I said. The third call was to the University of Michigan's Alumni and Family Relations Office. I explained that I was the grandmother of a graduating senior, that I had contributed significantly to her education, and that I had been unable to obtain a ticket through the family allocation. I asked if there was a general admission seating section or a wait list. The young man I spoke to was kind and helpful and told me that yes, there was a section reserved for extended family and community supporters, and that I was more than welcome to attend. I wrote down the parking information. I thanked him. I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in months. I drove up to Ann Arbor on a Friday in June. I had my navy dress. I had the hotel reservation I'd made 3 months earlier. I had a card for Sophie that I'd been writing and rewriting for 2 weeks. Not long, not dramatic, just the things I actually wanted her to know. That she was remarkable. That her grandfather would have been undone by her. That I expected her to take good care of people and to take good care of herself, in that order. I arrived at the venue early. The woman checking extended family into the community section was a volunteer, a retired faculty member named Helen, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the comfortable authority of someone who has spent decades managing large groups of young people. I gave her my name, and she found it on the list and handed me a program and said, "Welcome. Is this a granddaughter or grandson?" "Granddaughter," I said. "Sophie." Helen smiled. "Prima?" "Yes. We've heard good things. Enjoy the ceremony." I found my seat. I sat down. I put my program on my lap and looked out at the field filling up with families and the long rows of chairs where the graduates would sit. The June light was flat and warm, and the air smelled like cut grass, and someone nearby was crying already, which made me smile, because some people start early, and there is nothing wrong with that. I saw Nathan and Brooke and Connie and Vanessa take their seats in the family section across the field. Brooke was wearing red. I noticed her. Noticed me a brief look across the crowd, a small stillness in her posture, and then she looked away and said something to Connie, and they both turned in the other direction. I looked at the stage. When Sophie walked, she walked near the end of the alphabet, so I had time to feel everything slowly. I watched the students before her young faces, nervous smiles, the particular gait of people who can't quite believe the moment is real. I thought about who Sophie had been at 8 years old, sitting in my armchair in the dark watching a movie she couldn't follow, asking me questions I loved answering. I thought about her at 17 with the library books and the Saturday mornings. I thought about the phone call at 11 at night and what it had felt like to be the person she called. When her name was called, I stood up. I know I wasn't supposed to, it wasn't the section for standing, but I stood up anyway and I put my hands together and I clapped as hard as I could, and the woman next to me stood up too, because apparently that's what happens when you start. I couldn't see her face clearly from where I was, but I saw her pause at the top of the stage steps, diploma in hand, and look out at the crowd. She looked for a long time. Then she raised one hand, not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement, and walked off the stage. I sat back down. I pressed my fingers to my eyes for a moment, and then I looked at the program in my lap and breathed. After the ceremony, I waited near the fountain at the edge of the plaza. I didn't call Sophie. I didn't try to find her in the crowd. I just stood in the shade and watched the families and waited to see what would happen. What happened was that, 20 minutes later, Sophie came around the corner in her gown and cap, and she stopped when she saw me. She stood there for a moment the way she used to when she was small and trying to decide if she was in trouble or not. Then she crossed the plaza and walked into my arms and held on. "You came," she said. "Of course I came," Mom said. I know what she said. Sophie pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were red. She opened her mouth and closed it again. "Don't," I said gently. "Today isn't for that. Today is just for you." She put her cap back on crooked, and I reached up and straightened it, and she laughed her startled laugh, and I took a photograph of her there in the afternoon, light with the fountain behind her, and the plaza full of families and the whole, long, ordinary, beautiful fact of her life stretched out ahead. Of her. It was enough. More than enough. I did not go to the dinner Nathan had organized. I had not been invited, so I did not go. I ate at a small Italian restaurant near my hotel. Good pasta, a glass of wine, a book I'd been meaning to finish for a month. The waiter asked if I was celebrating anything, and I thought about it. Yes, I said. A few things. On the drive home the next morning, I took the long route. Not for any particular reason, I just didn't feel the rush I usually felt, that faint compulsion to get back quickly and make myself available. The long route went through a part of the state I'd always liked, small towns and old farmhouses and fields that were still wet from an early rain. I stopped at a diner and had eggs and coffee and read the local paper, and no one needed anything from me for 2 hours, and it felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. Nathan called that evening. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. He left a voicemail that said they needed to talk, that Brooke had received a letter from my financial advisor, that it seemed like I might be upset about something. Upset. Like I had misread a situation. Like this was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with the right explanation. I sat with the voicemail for a day before I called him back. When I did, I was calm. I want to be clear about that I was not cold, not vindictive, not performing a dignity I didn't feel. I was genuinely calm, in the way that you are calm when you have finally made a decision you should have made much earlier, and the making of it has cost you something real but left you lighter than before. Mom, Nathan said, I think there's been some confusion. There hasn't, I said. Brooke was just trying to manage the logistics. There really were only 4 tickets in our allocation. She didn't mean. Nathan, I stopped him. Not unkindly, but clearly. I've been making myself smaller for 4 years, so that the people around you would be more comfortable. I paid for Sophie's education because I wanted to, and I would do it again. But I'm not going to pretend that what happened was logistics. And I'm not going to keep making transfers to your household as though my presence in your family is something I have to purchase. He was quiet for a moment. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's true. There was a longer silence. I could hear the TV in the background, the same sound I'd grown up hearing from the living room, the particular murmur of an evening program. I thought about Nathan at 6 years old falling asleep on the couch. I thought about how much I loved him, and how that love had nothing to do with whether any of this was fair. I'm not angry, I told him. I want you to know that. But I've decided to stop waiting for an invitation into my own family, and I've decided to stop funding a dynamic that doesn't include me. That's all. He said he understood. I don't know if he did. I said I loved him, and I meant it, and I hung up the phone and went to bed. The following week I called my travel agent. Her name is Susan, and she has been booking my trips for 15 years, mostly modest ones, mostly domestic. She sounded surprised when I told her what I wanted. Italy? She said. Yes. Florence first. Then maybe the coast. For how long? 3 weeks, I said. Maybe 4. Dorothy. Who are you and what have you done with my client? I laughed. A real one. She booked it. 3 weeks in late September. Florence, Siena, Cinque Terre. I bought new walking shoes and a small journal and a phrase book that I started going through in the evenings after dinner. I was not good at Italian. I was not deterred, Brooke called once. She was conciliatory in the way that people are conciliatory when they have calculated that conciliation is strategically useful, warm enough to signal goodwill, vague enough to avoid admitting anything specific. She said she hoped we could move forward. She said family was important to her. She said she knew I was hurt, and she was sorry if she'd contributed to that. If she'd contributed. I noted the phrasing. I let it go. I hope we can move forward too, Brooke, I said. But I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was in April. I've made some changes that are going to stay changed. She didn't respond to that directly. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, and then we said goodbye, and I thought, that was the last time I will shape myself around what she needs from this conversation. It was a strange and quiet relief. Sophie called the first Sunday after graduation, same as always. She said she wanted to talk about the graduation, about what she'd seen when she looked out from the stage and found me in the other section, not the family section. I told her I found a ticket through extended family seating. Grandma, she said. Sophie, I said back. A pause. Was it worth it? I thought about standing up when her name was called. I thought about clapping so hard my palms hurt. I thought about her face when she came around the corner of the plaza and found me there. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, I didn't know about the ticket situation until the day before. I want you to know that. I know, I said. And I did know, or I believed it, which is close enough. I'm going to handle things differently, she said, going forward. With you. You don't have to make me any promises, I told her. Just be a good doctor. That's all I've ever asked. I could hear her trying not to cry. The same Sophie who called at 11 at night in the second year and told me she didn't think she was smart enough. The same girl who fell asleep in my armchair watching movies she couldn't follow. I love you, she said. I love you too. Now go celebrate. You have the rest of your life to figure everything else out. September came and I drove to the airport with one suitcase and the new walking shoes and the phrase book, whose pages were soft by then from handling. Carol came to see me off. She stood at the departure door with her hands in her pockets and said, Look at you. Don't make it a thing, I told her. It's absolutely a thing. It's a full thing. I laughed. I hugged her. I went through the doors. Florence was everything I had imagined, and nothing like I'd imagined, which is exactly how the places we've put off visiting tend to be. The hotel was small, in an old building near the river, with window shutters that opened onto a narrow street and the sound of morning traffic and someone somewhere playing something on an instrument I couldn't identify. I ate breakfast in a cafe around the corner every morning for the first 5 days. The woman who worked there learned my order after the second day and had it ready before I sat down, and I thought, this is the first time in years that someone has anticipated something about me without me having to ask. I walked everywhere. I got lost twice and didn't mind. I stood in front of paintings for longer than I'd ever allowed myself to stand still in my life. There was a painting in the Uffizi, a Madonna, calm-faced and utterly certain, looking slightly to the left of whoever was looking at her, that I stood in front of for so long that a guard came over to check on me. I told him I was fine, just thinking. He nodded seriously, the way Italians nod at things they decide to take seriously, and walked away. I thought about my yellow curtains. I thought about Nathan at 6 years old and Sophie at 8. I thought about 31 years of teaching and all the red pens and all the students whose names I still remembered. I thought about the money that was now a plane ticket and a hotel room and a painting I was looking at in a city I'd promised myself I'd visit for 20 years. I thought, I am not ruined. I am not bitter. I am not even particularly sad. I am a woman who spent a long time making herself small, and I have decided to stop, and it turns out the world is still here, and it is rather beautiful, and I am still in it. I bought a small print of the painting before I left the museum. Not a reproduction of the Madonna, something else. A landscape, hills and a pale sky. The particular Italian light that looks like it comes from inside the thing it's touching, rather than from above. I carried it wrapped in paper under my arm, all the way back to the hotel, and I stood it against the lamp on the nightstand and looked at it before I went to sleep. I have it on my wall now, back home, next to the yellow curtains, just to the left of Sophie's photograph. There are things I know now that I did not know 4 years ago. I know that love without boundaries is not generosity. It is an invitation for other people to decide what you are worth, and they will generally decide you are worth exactly as much as you ask for, which is nothing. I know that dignity is not cold, and it is not withholding, and it is not the refusal to love the people who have hurt you. It is simply the knowledge that you are allowed to take up space in your own life. I know that I spent 4 years being grateful for scraps and calling it grace. I know that a woman of 63 can buy walking shoes and a phrase book and stand in front of a painting in Florence for so long that a guard comes to check on her, and the guard will nod seriously, and she will be completely fine. Nathan and I talk now. Not the way we used to, not yet. Maybe not ever exactly, but we talk. Brooke and I are polite. I have made my peace with polite. Sophie is starting her residency in the fall. She calls on Sundays. Last week she called and asked if I would come visit her in her new city before she starts. She asked if I would help her figure out the new apartment. She said, "I want you to be the first person who sits in my kitchen and drinks coffee." "Yes," I said, without hesitation, without calculating what it would cost or whether I'd been officially invited or whether I was making myself too available. Just yes. Some people ask me if I regret the money. The tuition, the transfers, the deposits that weren't coming back. They ask it gently, the way you ask about a loss. I don't think of it as a loss. I think of it as a cost of becoming someone who finally understood her own value, and if that's what it took, then it was the best money I ever spent. The graduation was a Tuesday in June. The drive home was a Saturday morning in long light. Florence was September. And next spring, Sophie is graduating from her residency orientation, and she has already reserved my seat. First row. She made sure of it.